Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why those fancy smartphone studies might not be telling us the whole story about everyone? Well, this new research dives deep into that very question. Today we're talking about something super interesting in psychology, mobile sensing. Think about how much information your smartphone has about your life, passively collected just by you having it. Researchers are using this to understand us better, but the big question is, who are the people actually participating in these studies? Are we getting a true picture of everyone, or are we only hearing from a special kind of person? This is exactly what a team of researchers wanted to find out. They looked at two main ways studies might be biased. First, the type of phone people have. Most studies can only collect data from either Android or iOS phones because making apps for both is expensive. So what if people with one type of phone are just fundamentally different from people with the other? Second, they looked at who decides to participate. Not everyone who is asked will say yes, and the researchers wanted to know if the people who don't participate are different in important ways from those who do. They used two big studies with people who had already been part of long-term surveys. This was key because it meant they had information about people who said yes to the smartphone study and could learn about those who said no. They basically used these existing survey participants as a pool to recruit for their new mobile sensing studies. Study 1 was with a representative household panel, like a national survey. They invited people to try out a mobile sensing app for 14 days, recording things like app usage and sending short daily questions. Study 2 was similar but used a different type of online panel and had a much longer study duration, from 3 to 6 months. By comparing these two, they could check if their findings were robust, meaning they held up across different study styles. So what did they ask? They wanted to see if owning an Android versus an iOS phone was linked to a person's background and personality. They also wanted to understand if someone's willingness to participate in the mobile sensing study was linked to these same personal characteristics. They looked at things like age, gender, education level, income, and the big 5 personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Let's get to the juicy findings. First, concerning phone operating systems, they found some pretty consistent patterns. In both studies, people with Android phones tended to have lower levels of education and income compared to iOS users. They also found that people with lower levels of extroversion were more likely to own Android phones. This suggests that the type of phone someone has isn't random, it is linked to their background, and even some personality traits. Now, for willingness to participate. This one was a bit more complex because they looked at different stages. First, the intention to participate, and then the actual decision to install and use the app. In study 1, they found that older people were less interested in participating. For personality, they saw that people higher in openness to experience were more likely to show interest initially. But interestingly, when it came down to actually installing the app, people higher in neuroticism were less likely to follow through, even if they initially intended to. This gap between intending to participate and actually participating is a classic example of why just asking someone, "Would you do this study?" isn't enough. In study 2, which was larger, they saw similar patterns with age-older people were less likely to participate. They also found that people higher in openness were more likely to both intend and actually participate. Extroversion and agreeableness were linked to initial interest in study 2, but not so much to the final decision to participate. Neuroticism again played a role, with higher neuroticism linked to less actual participation. So, what does all this mean? The researchers found that yes, there is selection bias in mobile sensing studies. Certain types of people are more or less likely to participate, and this is linked to their phone operating system and their willingness to share their data. But here is the really important part. They concluded that the bias wasn't as dramatic as one might expect. When they compared their findings to selection bias in other common research methods like online surveys, the differences were quite similar or even smaller for mobile sensing. This doesn't mean we can ignore it. But it suggests that mobile sensing isn't necessarily worse than other methods we already use. They also offered some great advice for future research. To reduce bias from phone systems, researchers should try to make apps that work on both Android and iOS. To tackle non-response, they need to make apps user-friendly and clearly explain how data is protected. They also emphasize tailoring communication to different stages of recruitment and even to individual personality types, especially for those more prone to drop out, like people who are highly neurotic. Now, for the limitations, which are super important. These studies were done in Germany, and the phone market share can be different in other countries. Also, these studies focused on the general population. If researchers are studying specific groups, like people with mental health conditions or refugees, the biases might be different because those groups have unique challenges. And of course, technology is always changing, so what we see today might be different in a few years. The researchers also pointed out that they used short personality scales. A more detailed look at specific facets of personality might reveal more nuanced findings. And while they looked at several person characteristics, there are many others, like political or sexual orientation, that could also play a role. They also noted that in their studies, the bias from platform differences and non-response were a bit mixed together, making it hard to study them completely separately. Future research could try to disentangle these more. Overall, this research provides a strong empirical lesson. While mobile sensing is data-intensive and might seem like it would only attract a certain kind of person, the selection bias isn't as scary as you might think. It is there, and we need to be aware of it and work to minimize it, but it's no more or less problematic than biases we already deal with in other research methods. So, what is my take on this? I think this study is fantastic because it tackles a really practical and important problem for the future of psychological research. It's easy to assume that new tech automatically leads to cleaner data, but this research reminds us that human behavior, including who chooses to participate and how, always adds complexity. The fact that they found similar biases to older methods is reassuring in a way, but it also highlights the continuing need for careful recruitment and transparent reporting of who is actually in our studies. The idea of tailoring communication to personality, especially for those neurotic individuals who might be interested but then worry themselves out of participation, is really cool. It feels like a more humane and effective way to do research. And the call for researchers to be transparent about who is in their studies, regardless of the method, is something we should all champion. For future research, I'd love to see studies that directly test these tailored communication strategies. Can we actively reduce non-response by speaking to people's specific concerns? Also exploring interactions between study design and person characteristics, as they mentioned, could unlock even deeper insights. What appeals to an open and agreeable person might be different from what appeals to someone who is more introverted or conscientious. This research is a crucial step in making sure that the insights we gain from mobile sensing are as broad and representative as possible, helping us understand everyone's mind, not just a select few. What do you all think? Are you surprised by these findings? Let me know in the comments below if you found this video helpful. Please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.